Hi, everybody. Welcome to NewsNite for Friday, March 9th. Great to have you with us this week. The primary election is behind us. We'll talk about the winners and losers. Joy Oldfield asked for an investigation. She got one. Did she make her case worse? And some are looking at the Cuyahoga Falls Park and Rec Board today and wondering, what were they thinking? Those stories and more next on NewsNite. Post-election show, always one of my favorite because a lot to discuss. Let's meet our panel this week. Steve Hoffman joins us this week from the Akron Beacon-Journal. Freelance contributor and journalist Jody Miller is here with us this week. And always great to see Larry States here this week from WAKR. Ohio was billed as the top prize. The networks keyed in on Ohio throughout the night. Big picture, Rick Santorum has the lead throughout the night. Mitt Romney comes back at 11 o'clock. In the end, it's Mitt Romney, and I think it's Mitt Romney in most of our local counties. Did it go about what you thought it was going to go?
Well, I looked at the momentum going into Friday, the Friday before Election Day, and the polling that had been done by Quinnipiac University and others showed the race was tightening. Santorum was ahead at one point, a few weeks heading into the primary. Things began to tighten up, so the traditional theory is the person with the momentum in a close race carries that through the weekend into Tuesday. And that was basically the concept that Romney would win. And boy, but was it close. Less than 1 percentage point as it turned out. And this exposed, I think, and Romney, we have to say, spent a ton of money. Much more than Santorum.
Both and not only his campaign, but the super PAC that supports him.
So here you had a squeaker of a victory by Romney. He won. But he really didn't, we can talk about this later, but in many sectors of the electorate, Romney really, with evangelicals and conservatives and other groups, did not really seal the deal.
Well, I think what it does is it points up a little bit of a flaw in Romney's campaign and in Romney's appeal to voters. This is a man who has been the front runner, is now the front runner, obviously in terms of delegates. But there's still a disconnect, I think, between Romney and a lot of the voters that he has to appeal to. Now, don't forget, it is a Republican primary, and whoever the Republican nominee ends up being, the Republicans will, I think, all come together and support him. But I think what happened in Ohio showed that Romney had superior money, obviously, superior organization, because even had he lost the popular vote, which he won by, I think it was 10,000 votes, which is minuscule, but even had he lost the popular votes, he still, given the lack of organization by Santorum's campaign when they needed to get on the ballot for delegates, he still would have probably come out of Ohio far ahead in terms of the delegate count. And right now, when you talk about a nomination, it's the delegate number that matters.
Yeah, the thing about it is, though, I think there's a disconnect, too. I was really appalled by looking at the numbers from Summit County. The number of Republicans who actually turned out on Tuesday, there were 16% of the Democrats turned out. Obviously, they had some local races to vote on. I understand that. But only 8% of the Republicans, would you have a presidential primary? I mean, people apparently, some of the Republicans don't care in Summit County. Either that or they don't like either candidate. They don't like any of the candidates. I mean, how can you explain an 8%? I know they didn't have any local issues to vote on, but they had a presidential primary. They're trying to select their candidate to go up against, Barack Obama, and they end up 8%. That's shameful. It really is.
Overall turnout in the state was about 25%, way down from the last time. And the exit polling showed that the Republican primary voters, about 44% of them, felt strongly committed about their choice. So what you saw emerge, all you had to do is look at a map, a county-by-county breakdown. There's this huge swath of territory, starting up in the northwestern corner of the state, sweeping all the way across to the Appalachian area of Ohio, that went for Santorum. I mean, if you looked at that, you say, the guy should have won by a landslide. Well, those are not very populous areas. Romney's appeal was in the wealthier suburbs around the big cities, around Cincinnati, around Columbus, in northeast Ohio. Different kind of Republican voter in those areas. They're moderate. Romney did well among households with income over $100,000. So there's just this divide, cultural divide, geographical divide, income divide that's emerging in the Republican Party. And the challenge for Romney, who I think will be the nominee, is going to try to bring that back together. a lot of people, a lot of Republican strategists will tell you you can have a long primary, it can get kind of nasty, and then everybody gets in the same tent and sings Kumbaya. I am not. I have increasing doubts about how easy that's going to be for Romney to pull off.
It keeps us talking, gives us a lot to talk about. And again, Ohio became the heart of it all as the networks all tuned in, the nation tuned in, and Jody, you had a chance to talk with John Green about Ohio in the big picture.
I did have a chance to talk to John Green. We talked about, and the clip that we have for the viewers now is his analysis of why Ohio was, in fact, considered to be the big prize. But we also talked about an awful lot of other things that went on in this past election. But here's what Dr. Green had to say about Ohio as the big prize.
Why do the candidates think that Ohio was important? And there's a couple of reasons. One is Ohio is a very important state in national politics. A little bit rare for it to be so contested in a primary, but it's always heavily contested in a general election. So messages that work in Ohio are likely to work nationwide. A candidate that can complain, hey, I claim I won the Buckeye State, can make a pretty good case to fellow partisans, I'll be a good candidate in the fall election. And Ohio's a very diverse state. No state's a perfect microcosm of this big, diverse country, but Ohio comes just about closest of anyone. As I often tell my students, if it's in the United States, it's somewhere in Ohio. So candidates have an opportunity to come and deal with a very diverse electorate. A lot of the economic problems of the country have been problems in Ohio. Some of the social issues and other controversies are controversies in Ohio. So this is a really good place for candidates to do politics. And of course, being a big state, Ohio has a lot of delegates. Didn't have the most delegates on Super Tuesday, but it had a large number. And of course, there's a lot of electoral votes in the fall. So this just turns out to be a really important place, and that's why the candidates wanted to come here and do well.
So, of course, he sees it as the big picture that it is, and it'll probably stay that way till the rest of the election plays out this year. But you also talked to him about what else?
Oh, we talked about the influence of big money. And how, particularly in light of the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, corporations now can influence voting and influence campaigns. We talked about how a lot of those super PACs have a tendency to go with negative ads, and how negative ads do in fact impact voters. And while they may not like them, they nonetheless listen to them. We talked about the inclusion and the insertion of religious issues and social issues into this campaign as kind of a way to appeal to the evangelicals or the far more Christian or far more conservative Republicans. So it was a very interesting conversation, and it's wonderful that we have here, in Akron, one of the most nationally well-known political experts.
And you can watch all of that on newsnight.net.
You can.
But as we look at the local results now, what stood out to you from election night?
The close call for the two county council incumbents. I was really surprised by Tim Crawford. I was also surprised by Jerry Feeman, although Daniel Congrove had a history in county council, and we talked to Feeman after the election. He thought that played a big role in him barely squeaking by because Congrove had a lot of history with county council and wanted to get back on council again. But I thought that was a bit of a surprise. And also, judging by the number of yard signs I saw, which tells you can't judge anything by those, I was surprised Steve Berry pulled away from Frank Martucci. I thought that was a bit of a surprise because all I saw over the past few weeks was Martucci yard signs. I only saw very few Steve Berry. Obviously, there are a lot of people in Summit County who know Steve Berry from his years. He spent almost 30-some years with the Sheriff's Department and voted for him, and obviously he's got the experience in that department. Frank Martucci's history was more in the Akron Police Department. But that was a bit of a surprise, the margin of victory there. But those were the races that kind of surprised me, and also the Norton fire levy. I'm really surprised that Norton voters, knowing that their fire department was going to be closed at night, and they were going to have to rely on private ambulance services in surrounding communities. I was really surprised by that. Those were the most surprising votes, I thought.
I agree with Larry. I thought that the sheriff's race was very interesting. Particularly, I thought that Frank Martucci would possibly eke out a win, only because he's known in Akron. And given that Akron is a Democratic bastion, I figured that most of the Democrats would vote for Frank Martucci. They did not, so obviously it sets up a race this fall with Berry as the Democratic challenger for the open seat that's going to be in the sheriff's office with Drew Alexander not running again. The Norton issue was very, very interesting to me. And particularly in light of some of the news that has come out about the fact that it will now be, that fire station is now going to be manned by private ambulance companies. Not that the station's going to be manned, but if you have an emergency in Norton between 10 o'clock at night and 6 in the morning, God knows who you're going to call, and God knows how long it's going to take for them to get there.
Hope your neighbor has a hose, I guess.
Yes, or a defibrillator in their house.
Yeah. I got to give Frank Communal credit in his primary against Phil Montgomery. Phil Montgomery's not a very well-known person, but a lot of people expected a challenge, a strong challenge by Phil Montgomery. And Communal really pulled away in that primary, worked very, very hard, knocked on a lot of doors. He lost that state Senate race a few years ago, and I think that he emerged from that experience thinking, I'm really going to work hard and not mess up this time. I will say just a word about the school levies. Statewide, the passage rate for levies was not bad. It was worse in our area, the Akron-Canton area. And you look at districts like especially Woodridge, but some of the smaller districts that are Buckeye that are struggling in this climate to try to pass new money is not easy in any case, but it appears to be getting even more difficult locally for some of these districts, and it really is a pretty bleak picture. The governor has talked about a school funding formula. All he's really done so far that I can tell is that the Strickland administration had an evidence-based model that a lot of people thought showed some promise. John Kasich came in and scrapped it, and we really don't know what he has in mind going forward. There really is no plan. So you can't really look to the state for help. In fact, the state is cutting money for primary and secondary education. So it's a very difficult situation.
We'll talk a little more about levies and a little more about tactics as we move the conversation now to NewsNite.net.
On NewsNite.net, we cover a broader range of topics than we can on the air in 27 minutes. Be part of the conversation on our Facebook page and at NewsNite.net.
2 weeks ago, we talked about the case involving Akron Municipal Court Judge Joy Oldfield and whether or not she had acted inappropriately on a night that she was stopped by Copley Police in a car with a local attorney. She asked for an investigation. Copley Police conducted an investigation. And in the end, Copley's police chief says he is now more certain than ever that the officers' assertions from that night were correct. Did she dig herself a bigger hole?
Probably did. And I'll tell you, not only that, he was releasing the transcripts of the conversation between the officers and the discussion they had before even the report was put together or when it was put together. She probably has because, what was she going to expect that the chief was going to say, hey, my officer, lied on a report? I mean, she had to have expectations that the chief was going to stand behind this police officer. And he had no reason not to. I mean, the man filled out a very detailed report. He portrayed what he thought what he saw. And I do think it really hurt her case even more. And obviously, this is going to go on for a while. There's no doubt about it. And how much did it damage her career? How much did it damage, the entire court system? That's the relationships between the judges, the attorneys, and these advocates, public defenders. They're allowed to be friends outside the courtroom, but you have to watch when you come back into the court environment because people are watching. There's certain ethics you need to follow there. And, trying to, cover this up and throw it under the rug, it's being exposed more and more with her trying to do that.
Well, her attorney came out swinging when this happened, and presumably speaking on her behalf. I mean, he was speaking on her behalf, but, questioning the veracity of this report, saying it was politically motivated. I mean, and so she started the ball rolling, gave this story legs. So, the first thing you want to do in a story like this is make it go away, in one day if you can. Well, she gave the story legs with this accusation, and I give the police department in Copley kind of, they released some language that wasn't really politically correct. The back and forth between these officers, there was a little bit of a risk. I think a calculated risk in releasing all this information, but clearly. It shows that they were responding appropriately to it. You just don't see this. In Akron, maybe the cops would have driven right by this. But, this is a car that's sitting in a parking lot, not very far off the street, running.
Almost 2 in the morning.
Yeah, 2 in the morning, lights on. I mean,
We're going to stop and check and see who's there.
Well, and the other issue, too, is that in the transcripts that were released and in this report that came out from Copley, the judge seemed to be very worried about her name and whether her name would come out. And you know, I'm sorry, that kind of paints her as a rather self-serving in this regard. And I think that there was no crime committed, per se, between the two participants. Yes, the public defender was charged with was driving under the influence or being. She wasn't driving, but a control of a vehicle.
You've been under the influence of alcohol. You're not driving, but you're in control of a car.
Exactly.
And the judge wasn't charged with anything.
No, she was not at all. But the problem is, of course, and we're talking about holding judges to a higher standard. Conduct that does not have a perception of impropriety. And the fact that the most egregious fact about this whole thing to me is that the public defender continued to operate in the judge's courtroom for up to about a 2-week period of time. Whether there was anything that happened in regard to impropriety, whether the public defender was shown favoritism or not, we don't know. That's something that the Akron Bar Association is going to have to address. But that's an issue where I think the judge showed poor judgment. She should have made sure that this public defender did not appear in her courtroom at all, that she should never have given her a ride back and forth to work. At that point, she should have removed herself entirely from the situation.
Right.
And she did not, and that, to me, shows poor judgment.
The city prosecutor said that Doug Powley, who's leaving the office, but he said he couldn't find any evidence that these cases had been influenced. That's not the point. The point is, if you look at the judicial canons, is a judge is supposed to avoid situations like this. This was not just any attorney. This was an attorney who practiced in her courtroom. And so it's just, it's a mess. Now, what happens to it in terms of this disciplinary process, it's very secretive. It'll have to be resolved eventually by the disciplinary council for the Ohio Supreme Court. There's a whole process this has to go through. Politically, I got to say she's cooked. I mean, yes, judges have 6-year terms. That's a long time to try to repair damage. But this is the kind of damage that, come on.
The public may forget the damage, but you can bet that whoever is opposed to Judge Oldfield in the next election is not going to let the public forget it.
And she won this seat against Tom McCarty by making a big deal out of McCarty getting income from a case, and she accused him of impropriety. She raised the bar very, very high. Eventually, McCarty was totally cleared after Oldfield won the election, but McCarty was totally cleared. So really, she's being held to account in some sense in the court of public opinion for her own standard, a ethical standard that she set.
What goes around comes around.
It sounds like you're saying that she made a mistake that night. Whatever it is her mistake of even just being out together. But it sounds like you're saying she compounded it by complaining to the officers and then accusing an officer of lying.
Right.
And another thing, too, a lot of people say, well, this won't have any impact on the public if people come before her. Well, if they know about it, it will. It's been so widely publicized. The integrity of the court system is what people depend on when they go before a judge, okay? They're going to look at her and they're going to say, well, can I really trust whatever ruling she gives out because of what she's done? I'm saying I'm sure she's going to make professional opinions and she's going to weigh evidence very carefully in cases. I'm not impugning her reputation as a judge and what she does on the bench. What I'm saying is it's the public perception of what she does. If somebody comes before her in a court of law, they're going to say, well, I know what, I heard about you. You weren't exactly ethical yourself, so I'm worried about what you're going to rule in my case.
Well, and don't forget, this is a judge who has been a judge when this happened for a month. So it's not like she's got 5, 6 years of experience where she's got a good record in that regard. Right. That she could stand on.
And she stands to get backlash from the FOPs around the area because clearly accusing an officer of lying is not going to play well with them if it's proven not to be true. Of course, we have not heard from the judge herself. We continue to ask her. We continue to offer her the opportunity to even come on this program and in a long format share her thoughts. We'll see where that goes. Many also wondering today, what was the Cuyahoga Falls Board of Park and Rec thinking last night, voting 3-2 against a proposal that would have altered the membership rates for the natatorium to include domestic partners. This story drew national attention some 6 weeks ago when a gay couple applied for the married rate. One of them is a disabled Iraq veteran, drew so much support from people around the area. How does this happen last night? If for no other reason, in the court of public opinion, how do they not go along with making this change?
apparently the members of the Parks Board didn't care what the public thought. I mean, how else can you? It was a close vote. It was 3-2. So it was a very close vote. So it wasn't nowhere near unanimous. There was disagreement on the board, obviously, if you have that type of vote. But apparently, 3 members of that Parks Board didn't care what the public thought. They said, "This is our, Parks and Recreation Department. It's our natatorium. We're going to do what we want to do, and we think what we're doing is right." So apparently, they're taking a stand, and they're basically ignoring public opinion.
Well, it's almost a two-pronged issue too, because number one, if I'm reading what they decided to do correctly, they're saying number one, we have to follow the state of Ohio, and the state of Ohio does not recognize gay marriage. This couple is married. And so we're only doing what the state allows us to do. And besides, if we were to change our rate structure, which, by the way, they have, I think it's 100 different kinds of rate schedules in this rate structure. If we were to change our rate structure and be inclusive for domestic partners or households, we could lose $50,000. And what are we going to do without the $50,000? So there's 2 issues here. Thankfully, it now goes to Cuyahoga Falls Council, which council now will be able to weigh in on this matter, and hopefully they'll use a little bit better judgment in terms of being inclusive.
Yeah, I think the Parks Board, these are appointed people. I guess they're political in some sense. I got the sense that they just figured, they would take some heat from the other side of this. I mean, if they did have a policy that gave this couple and other gay couples or unmarried couples the family rate, they would take heat from the other side. And I got the sense in some ways they figured, let the city council, they're elected, they're in charge, let them figure it out. The Beacon surveyed other fitness centers. This is no big deal in other parts of our circulation area. There's usually something, call it what you want, a family rate, a household rate, something of that nature. So it's like, we don't care if, who's in the household. If you're living together and you're acting like a family, then we're just going to give you the household rate. No harm, no foul. Perfectly logical and, in my opinion, legal thing to do. This canard about the state of Ohio's, it's just it's law. It's a smokescreen.
And I ask my question is not because of one way I feel or another, but just because it seemed like the dominoes all aligned throughout the last few weeks and the national attention it got online, that it would have fallen and that they would have made the change last night. It seems like they have fanned the flames on something that they had a chance to put out.
But I agree with Steve. I think that they want Cuyahoga Falls City Council to make the decision because they're passing. This is a political football and a hot one. They say, okay, that's your responsibility. You are elected. We're appointed, so we're going to let you make the decision. Then you take the heat or do whatever you want with the public whenever it happens. So I really do believe they want Cuyahoga. I think that's what this really meant. That they said, okay, we're going to pass on this because Cuyahoga Falls City Council is going to have the last word on this. This is the way, our stance on it, it's a divided stance. Now it goes to Falls City Council and the ball's in their court.
But the interesting thing is, Cuyahoga Falls City Council may, in fact, pass it along, too, because I heard Mayor Robart on Ray Horner's show this morning on WAKR, and he said, well, gee, this might end up on the ballot in November for voters and residents of Cuyahoga Falls to decide. I mean, this is ridiculous.
That's really passing the buck.
Yeah, talk about passing the buck. That's it. So.
And this is not the kind of story, this goes back to the Joy Oldfield thing. There's some situations in politics and in, with other organizations where you just want to resolve the issue as quickly as you possibly can because it just keeps getting recycled. And if they put this thing on the ballot, it's just... So they've already got 2 more iterations of this. They've got the city council thrashing this out, and then possibly the mayor coming out. I guess it would have to be a charter amendment or something, or some kind of resolution to take to the ballot. So and the longer it goes on, it just makes Cuyahoga Falls, which already has a certain reputation for racial matters, maybe not fair now, but certainly in the day. And now we got this, so it's not pleasant.
It's not something you want your city to be known for.
Right now, they should be known for building the Portage Crossing development that's coming. They should be talking about some of these other things. But does this set them up? Because even if the council changes later, to get this anti-gay or you're not welcome in our community brand on a city, were they not thinking that this would be the backlash?
I think it's hard to chart out what the economic effect would be. But certainly if you're not perceived as being welcoming to or accepting of a certain element of the population, it's not a huge stretch to say, those people just won't go to Cuyahoga Falls for any reason.
No, but it could also impact you financially because, I mean, that the impact
Well, that's what
on
the mayor's
community.
argument is.
Right.
That's what the mayor's argument is if we do this, we're going to lose money, and we can't afford to lose money because, who knows how close to the margin they are on operating expenses for the auditorium.
But they're losing more than money in public opinion, I think. So,
yeah, they are.
There's you got to weigh the balance here, guys, and I don't think they've weighed the balance very wisely.
Maybe it's time to pay the Park and Rec Board a little more so they are willing to take the heat. We've got about a minute and a half left. Big decision by the Akron schools this week to close 3 elementary schools. They went through a long process, made that decision. It's what came out next when the superintendent mentioned we're going to have to cut another $10 million out, likely 140 teachers, middle school sports, elementary music, at least to discuss these kind of things. Steve, as you saw how schools did on their levies, how does this spell for Akron, who needs a levy later this year?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough sell, especially, we've noted that Akron does not have, I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head, but Akron does not have a high percentage of households with school-age children. So you start with that. I think it may be down in the 20s. And so you're up against, and then the economy, housing values, incomes are not rising. So you've just got all those hurdles. So I don't know. Akron, as I've said many times, is a good-sized district, operates efficiently. I don't know where else. They're faced with these kind of cuts.
And the problem is, these are the cuts that are going to affect the kids.
Right.
These are in the classroom kind of cuts. When you have 30 children in a classroom, it's very difficult to educate them the way they need to be educated, and these cuts are going to speak directly to that, which is going to speak to the scores,
exactly.
Which is going to impact how the school district is perceived in the community.
And they've been making progress, okay? They've been making progress, and what's going to happen now is this is sending a message to the voters. Now we're cutting into the bone. We're cutting into the meat of the school district. You have to make a decision whether you want that to continue. If you want that to continue, this is what you're going to get. We're going to cut out things that your kids like. So are you willing to pay a little bit more for them to be able to do this or not? Because we don't have the money to do it.
Again, we should say those are just the proposal, but the cuts are going to come, and they're going to be severe. We'll be talking about them. Larry, Jody, Steve, thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. Again, you can watch the extended edition of all of our interviews and the broadcast again over on NewsNite.net. See you next Friday, everybody. Good night.